If we look at the development of humanity from a long-term perspective, one interesting pattern becomes clear. Almost every major technological breakthrough was connected not simply to convenience, but to a fundamental expansion of human capabilities. Writing allowed knowledge to survive beyond the memory of a single generation. Printing made knowledge accessible to the masses. The internet removed the limitations of distance and time. Artificial intelligence is beginning to amplify humanity's ability to process information itself. And yet, throughout all of history, there has remained one problem humanity never truly knew how to solve. We never learned how to preserve the human being as a system. Yes, we learned how to preserve enormous amounts of data. We can store billions of photographs, videos, messages, documents, and voice recordings. The digital age has effectively transformed human existence into a continuous stream of information. But the more data surrounds us, the stronger a paradox becomes. The amount of information grows while the feeling of preserving the person does not. Because data is not the same as a human being. A photograph can capture a face, but it cannot preserve a way of thinking. A video can preserve a voice, but not the structure behind decision-making. A text can preserve a thought, but not the internal logic that created it. And if we examine this deeply, it becomes obvious that all forms of human legacy until now have essentially been collections of traces, rather than the preservation of personality itself. This is where the true significance of Time Capsule begins. When people first hear about the project, many perceive it as a futuristic concept connected to artificial intelligence, digital immortality, or technologies of the distant future. But the deeper one explores the idea, the clearer it becomes that this is not science fiction. It is an attempt to solve one of humanity's most fundamental challenges, preserving not only the results of life, but the very structure of thought itself. This distinction is extremely important. For thousands of years, humanity has preserved answers. For the first time, we are approaching the ability to preserve the system that generates those answers. And this is exactly why the idea creates such a powerful emotional response. Because on a deep level, human beings have always sought to overcome disappearance. We created culture, art, religion, philosophy, and technology largely as ways of extending ourselves beyond time. But every previous form of legacy was passive. It could not interact. It could not continue evolving thought. It could not adapt to new contexts. Time Capsule proposes a fundamentally different model. Simply put, the project views personality as a dynamic system that can be analyzed, structured, and reproduced within a digital environment. Not copied superficially, but modeled at the level of logic, behavior, reactions, and decision-making principles. And here it is important to understand something essential. This is not an attempt to create a virtual human, merely for technological spectacle. The real value of the technology lies in preserving experience and enabling that experience to be passed to future generations in a living, interactive form. Because if we examine humanity as a civilization, it becomes obvious that one of the greatest barriers to progress has always been the loss of accumulated understanding. Every generation is forced to repeat enormous numbers of mistakes. People learn through suffering, uncertainty, failure, and personal transformation. But when they disappear, something much greater disappears with them, a unique structure of understanding the world. Think about how many extraordinary minds humanity has already lost. How much irreplaceable experience vanished simply because no technology existed capable of preserving human thought as a functioning system. When we read philosophers of the past, we interact with fixed ideas. But we cannot ask questions. We cannot see how those individuals would interpret the modern world. We cannot engage in a real dialogue with their reasoning. Now imagine if such interaction became possible. Imagine a world where accumulated human experience stops being an archive and becomes an active system of interaction. At this point, Time Capsule becomes far more than simply an interesting technology, because the practical applications of this idea are enormous. Let us begin with the simplest and, at the same time, the most important level, the ordinary person. Most people today do not fully realize how quickly their lives disappear as systems of experience. Yes, photographs remain. Videos remain. Memories remain within loved ones. But the most important thing disappears: the person's internal understanding of life. Their way of seeing the world. Their reactions. Their personal logic. Time Capsule changes the nature of this process itself. Imagine a parent being able to leave behind not simply an archive of materials, but the ability for their child to interact with their system of thought. Not simply reading advice, but receiving responses generated through the actual logic of that person. Imagine future generations, decades later, being able to interact with models of your thinking, asking questions, understanding how you made decisions, how you faced crises, how you interpreted life itself. This is exactly where it becomes clear why the technology resonates so deeply with ordinary people. Because it answers one of humanity's deepest needs, the need for continuation. But what becomes even more fascinating is that the practical applications extend far beyond family history. In education, Time Capsule could completely transform the way knowledge is transferred. Today, education is largely based on transferring information. But information alone does not create understanding. Understanding is formed through structures of thought. Imagine learning not merely from the books of a brilliant scientist, but interacting directly with a model of their thinking. Asking questions. Receiving explanations. Observing the logic behind their analysis. That is an entirely different level of education. In business, the consequences could be even more significant. Today, many companies struggle with the loss of critical expertise. When a powerful leader or founder leaves, the strategic logic of the organization often disappears with them. Time Capsule offers a different possibility. If the thinking structure of a leader can be preserved, organizations gain the ability to retain not merely documents or systems, but the actual logic behind decision-making itself. This means accumulated expertise no longer disappears together with individuals. For medicine and psychology, this opens entirely new opportunities for understanding personality itself. Cognitive models make it possible to analyze not only behavior, but also the internal structures behind emotional reactions, perception, and thought. In the context of artificial intelligence, Time Capsule effectively creates an entirely new category. Most AI systems today operate as generalized data processing engines. But Time Capsule moves toward personalized cognitive models built upon real human experience. And this is critically important. Because the future of AI is not simply about greater computational power. The true breakthrough begins when artificial intelligence starts understanding the structure of human thinking itself. This is precisely why Time Capsule is already attracting enormous attention from the technology community, the crypto industry, and individuals capable of looking beyond temporary trends. Because the project exists at the intersection of several massive global directions: artificial intelligence, digital identity, Web3, cognitive technologies, preservation of human experience. But the most important aspect is not even the technology itself. The most important aspect is how this idea changes humanity's perception of itself. Until now, human life has largely been viewed as a linear process: birth, accumulation of experience, disappearance. Yes, the results of a person's actions could remain, but the structure of personality itself disappeared. Now, a new intermediate form of continuation begins to emerge. Not in a mystical sense, but in an engineering sense. And this may become one of the most significant shifts in the history of civilization itself. Because for the first time, humanity is approaching the ability to preserve not merely traces of a person, but their system of thought. And if we examine this in the long term, it becomes obvious that technologies like these will inevitably become part of the future of society. In the same way the internet once seemed unnecessary and strange, yet later became the foundation of modern civilization, technologies for preserving and reproducing human experience will eventually become a new norm. Because human beings have always sought to preserve themselves. The difference is that until now, we only had symbolic forms of preservation. Now, preservation becomes technological. And this is exactly why Time Capsule is already finding a massive global audience. People intuitively feel the scale of this idea, even if they cannot yet fully explain it in words. Because at the core of the project lies not simply technology. At its core lies a deeply human desire. The desire to ensure that our experience does not disappear. That accumulated understanding of the world does not vanish together with generations. That a person can leave behind not only memory but interaction itself. And if we try to express the philosophy of Time Capsule in one idea, it would sound something like this. Humanity has always preserved information. Now humanity is beginning to preserve thought itself. And perhaps this transition will become one of the defining technological revolutions of the 21st century. Because for the first time, a person gains the opportunity to leave behind not merely the story of their life, but the structure of their understanding of the world itself. Not simply a trace, but a continuation.